Villanova's marquee transfer portal edition decided he's staying put, and Kyle Neptune and the Wildcats, folks, they might be in trouble.
You are Locked On College Basketball, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What is going on, y'all? Welcome into the Locked On College Basketball Podcast, a daily national college hoop show, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Happy Thursday, folks. I am your host, Andy Patton, solo today at the place to get your college basketball content every single day. Folks, I want to thank all of you for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Shout out to those everyday listeners, and shout out to those of you who have joined us on our Discord channel. If you have not done so yet, it is free to join. There is a link in the show notes on both audio and video platforms. You can check it out there. We're talking hoops 24/7. Today's episode of Locked On College Basketball is brought to you by FanDuel. Folks, make every moment more. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 with any winning $5 bet. So visit FanDuel.com/LockedOn now to get started. Well, we got a great show today. We got some excellent news for Damon, Stoudamire, and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. We're going to get to that. We're also going to talk about a pair of freshmen and a transfer who are all heading to different Big 12 schools. We're going to close out the show with that. But we lead with the big story today in the college basketball sphere. Max Shulga no longer going to attend Villanova. Kyle Neptune's big transfer portal addition has decided to stay at VCU rather than transfer to the Wildcats. He committed to Villanova in early May, so it's been in the plans for the Wildcats for the last couple of weeks. Reportedly, never really wanted to leave VCU in the first place. He played 3 years at Utah State under Coach Ryan Odom. Ryan Odom then took the job at VCU. Shulga followed him to VCU. He's got an extra year of COVID eligibility, and really kind of, I guess, didn't want to not play for Coach Odom. That's who he's familiar with. He's had a lot of success playing for Coach Odom. But the reason that this is concerning, outside of the fact that Villanova loses a talented player and it's late in the portal season when you don't have as many options to replenish your roster, is that VCU reportedly went back to Shulga with a bigger NIL offer, and he decided to basically say, hey, thanks, but no thanks. You know, at this point in the transfer portal, for those who are unaware, unless you put your name to paper, unless you sign an NLI, unless you start enrolling in summer classes, if you have entered the transfer portal, your commitment to another school, it doesn't really matter. It doesn't really mean much until pen hits paper. And in this case, Shulga entered the transfer portal, committed to Villanova verbally, but there was nothing forcing him to stay at Villanova. He had been on campus. Reportedly, he was about to start moving in, was in the process of getting ready to do the move. And then then VCU says, hey, we found a little bit extra money. Reports aren't going to say the money amount, so we don't know what the dollars here are. But I don't think it's necessarily a situation of Villanova getting outbid by VCU, but it is a situation where Villanova was not able to they weren't able to convince Shulga to show up they didn't have enough money to make him stay. I don't know that VCU's offer ended up being more than Villanova's. I guess that's the best way to put it. My guess is that it probably was not. It was maybe comparable. But at the end of the day, you can't be losing kids like this. This is maybe a unique situation. He wanted to play for his coach. He's familiar with him. Again, he's already followed him to a different school. But this is a really bad blow for a Villanova team that is looking like they are in dire straits heading into what will be Kyle Neptune's third season. A little bit about Shulga, for those of you who aren't familiar. He's a 6'5" Ukrainian guard. He's got 1 year of eligibility remaining, like we said. 3 years at Utah State, followed Coach Ryan Odom to VCU. Last year with the Rams, averaged 14 points, 4.5 boards, 3.5 assists, shot 41.5% from three on 5.6 attempts per game. He was going to be a lead ball handler, a primary outside shooter, potentially going to be the leading scorer, or at least in the conversation to be the leading scorer for Villanova's team next year. And now they don't have him. They're out of guard. And looking, kind of removing the Shulga aspect of it all, just looking at Villanova's offseason, it's fair to be pretty darn concerned if you're a Wildcats fan at this point. The notes here that I have, as candidly as I can put it, is this team even going to be good next year? because right now the jury is pretty darn out. Justin Moore, Tyler Burton, Hakeem Hart, gone. All three of those guys are out of eligibility. They are not returning for Villanova. Mark Armstrong stayed in the NBA draft process. He is gone. That is a big loss for Kyle Neptune and the Cats. TJ Bamba transfers to Oregon. Brendan Howson transfers to Kansas State. Lance Ware is in the portal. Trey Patterson transfers to Rice. Your only returnee who averaged more than 1 point per game last year is Jordan Longino, who averaged 6.6. He is the only player returning for Villanova, confirmed to be returning for Villanova, and that's a key, that averaged more than 1 point per game last year. Now, the team did add a couple of transfers. Tyler Perkins is coming in from Penn, Ivy League player, ranked 167th among transfers on Evan Miyakawa's website. They also add LaSalle guard Jameer Brickus, who is 366th on Evan Miyakawa's transfer portal rankings. You also have a trio of freshmen coming in. All of them are outside the top 60, so not super marquee transfers. But again, Josiah Mosley's 63rd in the class. Matthew Hodges 72nd. Malcolm Thomas, is 144th. So you got a couple decently quality freshmen coming in. I like Tyler Perkins. I think he's a quality addition from Penn. He's a very productive Ivy League player. But right now, everything hinges on Eric Dixon. Because Eric Dixon, as I'm recording this right now, is still in the NBA draft process. He has about 1 week to make a decision on whether he is going to return to school and come back to Villanova. He's not in the transfer portal. So if he's coming back to school, he's coming back to Villanova, or stay in the NBA draft process. Eric Dixon, incredibly efficient player, averaged 16.5 points, 6.5 boards last season, shot 34.6% from three as a big man. He's a stretch four, really talented player. But I'm not sure if he's going to come back. I'm not sure why he would. Majority of your teammates from last year are gone. So you're not going to come back to familiar faces necessarily. You're not really coming back to a team that looks incredibly promising at this point. Again, a couple freshmen or a couple transfers coming in, a couple freshmen coming in that might be fine, but nothing that really screams top 5 team in the Big East, certainly not top 3 team in the Big East. And if I'm Eric Dixon, I might just take my chances on the pro route, whether it's going to the summer league and maybe getting a G League invite. Maybe he does sneak into the back half of the second round. You never know. It could happen, but there's not a lot of incentive to return to a Villanova team that doesn't look like they're going to be particularly good next year. Kyle Neptune needs a big move. Retaining Eric Dixon is a big move, but they probably need more than that. The biggest thing that they could do, and they brought him on campus, so they're off to a good start, is to woo Wooga Poplar, a Philadelphia native, somebody who could return home, play for the Wildcats, get that opportunity to be in the Big East. Poplar was productive last year at Miami, a bit inconsistent, dealt with some injury stuff. He is currently also in the NBA draft process, although most people expect that he will return to school. He is in the transfer portal, obviously. Has been getting contact from Kentucky, has been getting contact from BYU, has been getting contact from other schools as well, is somebody who Oregon, I believe, is in the mix as well. And I think he's a really good fit now for Villanova. He was a good fit before because they just needed talent on that roster. But now, especially without Shulga in the mix, you really need a lead guard. You need a floor spacer, an outside shooter. You need somebody who's going to have the ball in their hands and score a lot of points. If I'm Kyle Neptune and Villanova, and I'm hoping they've already done this for their sake, for their fan base's sake, you call Wooga Poplar and you throw the kitchen sink at him. Everything that you have, which may not be very much based on what's happening with Max Shulga, but you toss it all at Wooga Poplar. Everything that you got. Because if you can get him to come to campus and you can get Eric Dixon back, you got a fighting chance. If you get one of those guys, you might be okay. If you don't get either of them, and you can't find a way to pull some other high-profile player that's in the transfer portal that we're not thinking of, or convince somebody who's already committed somewhere to come to Villanova, honestly, the roster right now, it looks like a bottom 4 team in the Big East. This team is probably not going to finish in the top half of the conference, even if they get one of Poplar or Dixon. If they get both, maybe. But the days of Villanova dominating the Big East, the days of them being a consistent Final Four team, national championship team, they are over. And at this point, Kyle Neptune's seat, it's probably pretty darn warm. And it should be, because last year did not go well. The first year, you give them a break. It's a first year replacing a Hall of Fame head coach. It's tough, et cetera. They had some injuries that first year, Cam Whitmore. This next year, a little bit harder to find excuses. Now, losing players to VCU, not retaining talent. It's fair to wonder if Kyle Neptune's going to be in his last year coaching Villanova this upcoming season. We're going to move on, talk about Damon Stoudamire and the Yellow Jackets of Georgia Tech. They got some fantastic news for their roster this week. We're going to talk about whether they could be a sneaky contender in the ACC next season. All that coming up in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, Yahoo Finance. You folks know, you listen to the show, you know I love stats, you know I love numbers and data so much, and it doesn't just apply to sports. I also really enjoy keeping tabs on how all of my different investments are doing. And I used to track it all by myself using a bunch of different spreadsheets. It got complicated and convoluted and was taking up too much time out of my life. So I was speaking to my financial advisor, and they suggested just using Yahoo Finance. It's a one-stop shop to keep track of all my finances in one single location. And for more than 25 years, Yahoo Finance has been the brand behind every great investor. Whether you're a seasoned investor or just looking for that extra guidance, Yahoo Finance gives you all the tools and data that you need in one secure place. Folks, you can securely link your brokerage accounts for a unified view of your wealth, including 401k and other investments. A comprehensive perspective is what sets apart great investors, and it's how Yahoo Finance ensures you have the insight to look at your wealth in its entirety. With a community of over 90 million users every single month, their real strength is helping you on your way to financial success. So for a comprehensive financial news and analysis, visit the brand behind every great investor, yahoofinance.com. That is the number one financial destination, yahoofinance.com. All right, folks, staying out east, moving out of the Big East into the ACC. We're talking about Damon Stoudamire and the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets coming off a successful, albeit up and down, first season for Stoudamire with the Yellow Jackets. They got some really big news in the fact that Baye Ndongo is returning to Georgia Tech for his sophomore season. Ndongo was a 6'9" big from Senegal. He started 29 games last year as a freshman for the Yellow Jackets, played about 29 minutes a game, averaged about 12.5 points, 8 boards, a little over a block per game, shot 57% on 2-pointers. Really, really effective, efficient score. He was 6th in the ACC in effective field goal percentage. That was 56.6. He was also 7th in the ACC in rebound percentage. He was a good scorer, efficient scorer, and a great rebounder. And Ndongo declared for the NBA draft, and he participated in the G League Invitational. And he didn't get – there was only, I think, 5 or 6 players who were at the G League Combine who got invited to the NBA Draft Combine. He was not among them, but his performance at the G League camp was good, and there was some – like consternation among the Georgia Tech fans of like, hey, are we going to lose him? He was really good, but he didn't enter, we're really happy he didn't enter the portal, which is great news for Stoudamire and that staff. You want to be able to build something in the ACC and start challenging the top dogs. You got to keep the talent that you get. First, you got to start getting the talent, which Damon Stoudamire has already done. Now you got to find ways to keep it. This is huge news for this team because Ndongo doesn't enter the transfer portal and he doesn't stay in the draft process. Probably a smart decision for him. He's very talented, and I think the numbers and the productivity could lead him to being an NBA prospect in due time, but he needed a little bit more seasoning. I think this is a smart decision for him to come back to school. It's obviously great for Stoudamire and Georgia Tech. They needed to get him back into the mix, and it's been kind of a quietly very solid offseason for Stoudamire. This is kind of the biggest thing, and I'll quote Trilly Donovan, as we've done on the show a few times. The best gets sometimes are the ones you already have. And I think that's kind of the fit here is like they've made some good additions in the portal. They've got some good freshmen coming in, but the biggest headline for Damon Stoudamire and Georgia Tech right now is really just getting Ndongo back in the mix because he's such a valuable player to have on that team. But looking at some of the guys they have added, Luke O'Brien's a combo guard from Colorado, averaged about 6.7 points, a little under 4 rebounds last year. He's a good three-point shooter, 37.5%. He comes in to kind of fill a two-guard role for Stoudamire's team. Javian McCollum, a recent big-time addition coming over from Oklahoma State, the point guard over there for the Pokes, 13.3 points and 3.5 assists per game for him. So you kind of replace your whole backcourt because Miles Kelly was the team's leading scorer last year. He's in the transfer portal right now, but you get 2 new guards coming in, O'Brien and McCollum. That's a quality starting backcourt in the ACC. You also get a handful of very quality freshmen coming in as well. And Stoudamire's recruited really well, and he's been able to recruit really well in the Atlanta area, trying to keep kids home who are from Atlanta, who are in the area, keep them around at Georgia Tech. And I think that's a really smart recruiting strategy for Stoudamire. And he's very much a player's coach. Players really like playing for him. That's why you're able to retain talent. That's why you're able to get high-profile freshmen. They got Jaden Mustaf coming in, 4-star shooting guard, 56th in the recruiting class. That's a really high-profile get for Stoudamire's staff. They also have Darion Sutton, a 4-star small forward. He's number 90 in that recruiting class. You have Dorian Onwucheka coming in, 3-star center. He's 148th in the class. So you got 3 guys in the top 150 of this 2024 recruiting class. You got 2 quality guard transfers coming in and join the program as well. You also got Ryan Mutombo joining the program. He's not a particularly effective player. I think he averaged less than a point per game last year at Georgetown, but kind of fun to get a Georgetown legacy like Mutombo to come over to Georgia Tech and play there instead. So I'm cautiously optimistic. I've seen some posts on Twitter, some very excited fans who are saying, okay, Georgia Tech's going to compete for a top 5 spot in the ACC. They're going to be pushing for an NCAA tournament bid. I would love that. I'm a Damon Stoudamire fan. I followed his career as a player, as I'm a Portland Trailblazers fan, so I followed him when he was a player. I also followed him when he started coaching at Pacific. As somebody who follows the WCC very closely, he led the Pacific Tigers to a 500 record. Folks, I don't know if people appreciate how freaking hard it is to lead Pacific to anything outside of the complete cellar in the WCC. It is a low-resource institution. It is in Stockton, California, which is not an appealing place to be at all. It is a really tough place to recruit. It is a really tough place to retain talent. It is a really tough place to win. Damon Stoudamire had success at Pacific. And that, to me, told me all that I really needed to know about his ability to succeed as a Division I basketball coach. He goes to the NBA after that, coaches with the Boston Celtics and his friend Ime Udoka. Now he's back at Georgia Tech. We already saw last year their record in Quad 1A games was phenomenal. They won big-time games last year. They beat some of the best teams in the entire country. They also lost games they had no business losing because there was a young coach and a young team, and they made a lot of mistakes. But now they're bringing a lot of that talent back. They're bringing in veteran pieces that fit what they want to do in McCollum and O'Brien. I'm cautiously optimistic. Do I think this team is realistically going to finish in the top 5 in the ACC? Probably not. If I had a betting line on like 5.5 for the spot in the standings, they'd probably go a little lower because Duke's going to be in there. Carolina's going to be in there. Clemson and Virginia are still going to be in the mix. Louisville, I'm cautiously optimistic about, a little bit more so than Georgia Tech. So like there's a lot of teams that are going to be in that mix right there. But this has been a really quietly excellent offseason for Damon Stoudamire and Georgia Tech, coming off of what I thought was, I wouldn't say excellent, but a quietly solid first season for him with the Yellow Jackets. Well, folks, TCU added another big-time transfer while a pair of Big 12 schools brought in some nice freshman reinforcements. We're going to get to all of that in just a second. Right after I tell you about today's sponsor, FanDuel. Folks, it is winner take all time in the NBA and NHL, and FanDuel is giving you a shot to bring home a big W of your own, because right now, new customers will get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That's $150 to bet on spreads or money lines or player props or over-unders and more. And look, if I just completely sold you on Georgia Tech and you're like, you know what? It's not going to be a top 5 finish in the ACC. They're winning the ACC. They're getting a top seed in the tournament, and they are dancing all the way to the dang national championship. Folks, I got great news for you. Right now at FanDuel, plus 10,000 for Georgia Tech. If you are feeling it, if you're thinking this is the year for my Yellow Jackets, go smash that button right now. You're never going to be able to profit more than you would today. So visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make every playoff shot count. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. All right, y'all, closing out the show today with a handful of Big 12 news roundup type information here. We're going to talk first about TCU adding Old Dominion guard Vasean Allette. He is a very, very elite scorer. This is the second really big-time, high-profile scoring mid-major guard addition for Jamie Dixon and the Horned Frogs. This comes after Trezerian White, who comes from UNC Wilmington, a guy who put up 30 burgers, or I think it was 25 plus points against both Kentucky and Arkansas last year. Really high profile scorer that they get in White. Now they get Allette coming over from Old Dominion, 17.5 points per game last year. He also averaged 5.7 boards, 3.1 assists, and just under 2 steals per game. Shot 48.8% on 2-pointers. That was over 11 attempts per game. He also shot 35.5% from 3 on about 4.2 attempts per game. However, Allette was dismissed from Old Dominion's team 19 games into the season for, quote, conduct unbecoming of a monarch. That is the quote according to the interim head coach for Old Dominion at the time. There's really not a lot of other information outside of that. Allette responded to the statement, said he's, it's unfortunate things didn't work out for him. But he's, thankful for the time and wanting to move on. It was a very kind of generic statement, not putting it down, just didn't offer any additional information. We have to assume that Jamie Dixon and TCU and the staff did their due diligence to determine that this was a risk worth investing in. Obviously, the talent is there. He's a dynamic scoring guard, a high volume scorer, a good defender. Again, about 2 steals a game is fantastic. Solid distributor. Like, he can do a little bit of everything. This is a good player. But obviously, you don't want to be taking risks unless you want to mitigate the risk as much as you possibly can. Getting dismissed in the middle of a season for a mid-major team when he was very clearly their best player is not nothing. It's not nothing. I don't know what it is, and I'm not going to speculate by any stretch, but it's not nothing. I would trust that the staff here, figured out what it is and determined that this was worth it. But it is certainly an aspect, an element of this transfer portal edition that is kind of worth keeping a closer eye on. It is the 6th, transfer portal edition for TCU. They are rehauling that entire roster over there. They added Frankie Collins from Arizona State, Noah Reynolds from Green Bay, Brendan Wenzel from Wyoming, RJ Jones from Kansas State, and of course, as I mentioned before, Trezerian White from UNC Wilmington. Not sure if TCU is going to be great next year, bad next year. It's a lot of moving parts here, but I can tell you one thing: they're going to be different. They're going to be different than they were last year, and I think Dixon's going to do a good job of getting these pieces together and put together another team that's going to compete in the very competitive Big 12 conference. A couple freshman additions here for a pair of Big 12 schools. We'll start with Texas Tech, adding 4-star point guard Christian Anderson Jr. in the 2024 recruiting class. He is the 101st ranked player in the class, the number 10 ranked point guard. He previously decommitted from Michigan following their coaching change over there. The second freshman addition for Grant McCaslin and the Red Raiders following 3-star small forward Leon Horner. They've also had a very productive transfer portal season as well. Elijah Hawkins, one of the most productive passing point guards in the entire country, averaged over 7 assists a game last year at Minnesota. He's committed to Texas Tech along with Kevin Overton from Drake and Fede Federico from Pitt. Last but not least, BYU, the Cougars, add themselves another freshman as well. Kevin Young getting his work done. As soon as he takes over at BYU, 2 of the top 7 highest rated recruits in program history, according to 24/7 Sports, have been added by Kevin Young in the last month. And I say that with the caveat that this program has not historically been in the Big 12 and that we would have expected their recruiting to tick up going from the WCC to the Big 12. So it's probably not a stunner that they're able to add freshmen that are at a higher level than they maybe previously were recruiting at, but still. Anytime you hire a new head coach when you were not expecting to have to do a coaching hire, Mark Pope leaving for the Kentucky job was not something that most people had on their bingo card, even 2 weeks before it ended up happening. To hire a coach somewhat suddenly, especially with BYU's kind of limited scope, because they tend to hire people in the Latter-day Saints church. They're more limited in who they can hire. They get a guy in Kevin Young, who's a NBA assistant coach, prolific coach, very well regarded and well respected within coaching circles. And he goes out and gets you 2 top 10 recruits in program history. That's fantastic. The guy here that they added is Elijah Crawford. Elijah Crawford was committed to Stanford, and he decommitted from Stanford and flipped to BYU. And as much as I'm sitting here giving credit to Kevin Young and their new head coach, this credit here goes to Brandon Dunson. Brandon Dunson was the head recruiter at Stanford who was recruiting Crawford to Stanford in the first place. Dunson then moved over to take a job at BYU and effectively brought Elijah Crawford with him. BYU needed a win here in the freshman class. They lost Colin Chandler, a guy that they've been waiting on for 2 years while he did his LDS mission. He then flipped to join Mark Pope at Kentucky, so that's a loss for BYU in that incoming class. Crawford kind of helps fill that hole. He'll be a nice backup for Dallin Hall. BYU is still active. As I'm recording this right now, Chaz Lanier is kind of the big story in college basketball. We were kind of waiting to see if he was going to commit today on Wednesday evening. As I'm recording this, he has not. It's between Tennessee and Kentucky, and BYU is in the mix as well to just be in the conversation for a player that is also being pursued by SEC powerhouses like Tennessee and Kentucky is a really good sign for BYU. Certainly, they'd love to get Jackson Robinson back. It sounds like if he doesn't stay in the draft process, that Robinson is probably going to transfer and, in fact, might end up at Kentucky. But still good for BYU to be in these conversations. They had a very successful year last year under Coach Pope. I'm very intrigued and excited to see what Kevin Young can do. The Marriott Center is an absolute blast of a basketball arena that is a dedicated, passionate fan base at BYU. And if they start getting Big 12 marquee talent in, and Kevin Young proves that he can really coach, this is a team that could seriously be on the rise. And a player like Crawford is just another example of the direction that this program is headed. It's going to wrap it up for me today here on the Locked On College Basketball Podcast. Folks, thank you so much for making this show your first listen or your first watch of the day. Once again, a shout out to those everyday listeners and a reminder to join us on our Discord channel if you have not done so yet. Isaac and I will be back on Friday getting you ready for the weekend. Some potential NBA draft stay or go decisions coming up. We'll keep you up to date on the Chaz Lanier sweepstakes if there's any updates on that. And we'll get into next week getting you ready for the final NBA draft decisions, more transfer portal updates, and everything else going on in this wonderful game of college basketball. Thanks again. And until next time, as always, peace out.